Warm welcome to all of you. It's my pleasure to open the session today on race and ethnicity in migration on behalf of the co-organizers MFA, Migrant Forum in Asia, the Cross-Regional Center for Migrants and Refugees, PICUM, the Platform for International Cooperation on Undocumented Migrants, Alianza Americas, CMPD, the Climate Migration and Displacement Platform, and the Civil Society Action Committee. So welcome to this fourth round, which, as you may remember, is part of a global civil society consultative process that was started in April 2021, a few months back. And we are now building on 3 previous rounds of civil society engagement, intense discussions on 5 key thematic areas. And today we'll be focusing on key messages and action points identified by civil society in the previous rounds on this very important theme of race and ethnicity in migration. So we're thrilled to be joined for this 4th round by local governments who will exchange with us and share their thoughts and perspectives on race and ethnicity in migration, in particular on those outcomes from previous rounds that we summarized in the 1 pages and postcards that were circulated before this call. So welcome to all of you. This session will be moderated by our dear friend Pefi Gengi, who's the migration focal point for Pacific Civil Society from Pacific Islands Association of NGOs, Piango, who's joining us today, or rather tonight, from the Pacific. So it's a pleasure to have you, Pefi. Thank you for joining us so late in your day. The conversation is yours.
Matiki mo, matiki tu, monu tangalo. Matiki mo, matiki tu, monu tangalo. Fralo falahia tuki am tolu si frawe ki atua. Kua frevia tau tolu ke mga honi. In Hawaii, aloha. Tahiti, Yorana. Fiji, Bulavinaka. Tonga, Maloelele. Samoa, Talofalava. Tuvalu, kia whakawetai. Cook Islands, kia orana. PNG, wā. And others. Inasmuch as I can greet you from left to right, north to south, I do. Welcome to this. I know that you join me in thanking our peoples who are translating, those skilled interpreters. It is available to you. So, merci, shukran, grazie. It is available in Arab, French, and English, and also Spanish. Please tune in to the appropriate as you will. In terms of where we're at, how wonderful to see you on the screen. And to those of you who have suffered losses at this time, our condolences. In terms of building on the internal dialogues last year about the interlinkages between race and migration, the People's Migration Challenges organized 2 broad discussions, and you know this because you followed, among the global civil society as part of its webinar series. It became clear that we are on a steep learning curve on the issues of race, ethnicity, migration, and that we are just beginning to explore how to incorporate racial injustices. And so, within this context of migration, it is complex. The COVID-19 pandemic has exacerbated pre-existing structural inequalities caused by institutionalized racism, shedding a light on how systemic injustices are deeply embedded in our particular societies. You are all aware of this. The wonderful thing is, it's like speaking to the choir. But let us just remind you of some of the things, some of the key messages that have come out and that you have actually reiterated, repeated with each webinar that we have met on. So migration, whilst it is a global phenomenon, is significantly constrained by race, ethnicity, nationality, socioeconomics, class, caste, and religious belief. These social constructions create varying access and restrictions to migration for different groups, especially migrants of African descent and migrants from poorer socioeconomic classes. So the more oppressed groups, their spatial and social mobilities are much more restricted. We know this. And any gains that may accrue often disappear in times of crisis, such as this global one that we are all part of. Institutionalized racism also places citizens over foreigners as a burden on society. It criminalizes border crossing, militarizes family separation. It depicts migrants as a burden. Migrants of African descent are particularly more discriminated and criminalized than others, and are the most likely to be deported on criminal ground and or not deported, which leads us very nicely into our first dynamic keynote. I have the honor of introducing Christina Francois, and the Executive Director of the Office of New Americans of Miami-Dade. She is a social justice advocate, a policy strategist with a proven track record of engaging stakeholders across multiple sectors to advocate for the needs of marginalized peoples. And so as the Executive Director, she spearheads a countrywide initiative to bring legal and financial resources for immigrants out of offices into the community, just the kind of person that we want to hear from. She is a first-generation Haitian American woman who's driven by the desire to create more opportunities for immigrants and marginalized communities to have a voice. So as a freshman in high school, she was quite fascinating, and she will tell you all about that. She's also an extremely educated woman in political science and history from Hunter College, and she'll tell you about that. She's also co-director of Law for Black Lives, where she coordinated a network of more than 3,000 legal professionals to provide legal support to democratize the criminal justice system. It's wonderful to have you here, Christina, especially as we've heard that over in the Glades County Detention Center, there's about 100 people that are actually detained and have gone on a hunger strike. We want to hear more about that, but the floor is yours. Welcome once, welcome twice. Over to you.
Thank you so much for having me. Hi, everyone. So as you heard a little bit more about me, I really do live at the intersection of race, gender, and migration, and I bring that perspective to my practice as an advocate, an organizer, and a local government leader. And so I'm really excited. I was really excited to read the initial one-pager and some of the talking points that had come out of your previous discussions. I wholeheartedly agree with many of the recommendations that you all had already proposed. And I know that there is no way for us to be able to meet the needs of migration globally without addressing race and ethnicity, particularly the disparities in our legal system, as well as our cultural and interpersonal practices. And so in this moment, it is particularly difficult for marginalized communities, especially when we think about times of economic crisis, which we are witnessing, climate crisis, which we are witnessing, in addition to the COVID-19 pandemic. And we know that when there are moments of crisis and scarcity, that ethnic and racial violence only increases and that xenophobia only increases, whether that is that marginalized communities are scapegoated into being the cause of these crises, or it is an excuse to further exclude communities. And so I will pause there. I know that there's going to be a little bit more of a discussion, but thank you so much for inviting me to speak.
Thank you, and thank you for kicking off what is an extremely promising exchange. Ladies and gentlemen, you know that as a civil society, we must advocate for the widespread political commitments to racial justice, institutional change, and a cohesive legislation and global policies, of course, on structural racism and discrimination. The beauty is that you are all human rights defenders, and so I speak to the converted, but perhaps there are others that you could work a lot more with. But however, hold on to that thought. So by focusing more on progressive and holistic structural changes towards race and ethnicity, I know that we can begin to change repressive and discriminatory migration policies and uplift inclusive social protections. And that leads us very nicely into introducing our next speaker. And so Lujan Perez Villa is the coordinator of the Technical Secretariat of the Latin American and Caribbean Coalition, International Relations and Cooperation of the Municipality of Montevideo of Uruguay. And she is also the current coordinator of the Cities Against Racism, Discrimination and Xenophobia. Fabulous. And a technical coordinator on the International Relations and Cooperation. And previously, you'll be really pleased to note that she also worked with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Uruguay as the assistant in the International Cooperation Division. She has a degree in international relations, and I know she can tell us a little bit more about herself, but to you, a good welcome this evening, this morning, this afternoon, and the floor is yours.
Muchas gracias, muchas gracias. Gracias a todos y a toda la audiencia y a la organización por darnos esta oportunidad de presentar nuestro trabajo desde la Coalición Latinoamericana y Caribeña de Ciudades contra el racismo, la discriminación y la xenofobia. Bueno, es un gusto saludarles y agradecerles en nombre también de la Intendencia de Montevideo por esta invitación, que es tan importante participar de estos eventos sobre un tema que nos convoca y que nos ocupa diariamente. Para comenzar, realizaré una breve presentación de la organización, que quizás no todos la conozcan. Es una organización de ciudades que es una red que forma parte de una organización más amplia, que es la Coalición de Ciudades Inclusivas y Sostenibles de UNESCO, y que nuclea 7 coaliciones a nivel regionales a nivel mundial que fomentan el intercambio de experiencias y buenas prácticas con el objetivo de mejorar sus políticas de erradicación del racismo, la discriminación y la xenofobia. La coalición latinoamericana, que la llamamos Coalición LAC, surge en el 2006 en el primer Foro Iberoamericano de Gobiernos Locales, realizado en la ciudad de Montevideo, bajo el título Migraciones, desde lo global a lo local, con el compromiso de 40 ciudades de la región. Está liderada por la Intendencia de Montevideo y hoy en día reúne a más de 70 gobiernos locales de 15 países de América Latina y el Caribe que se han comprometido a través del cumplimiento de un plan de acción de 10 puntos en la defensa de los derechos humanos a través de sus iniciativas y su impulso colaborativo en la toma de acciones a nivel internacional. La coalición LAC, a través del compromiso de sus propias ciudades, se ha ido transformando en una plataforma consolidada de difusión de experiencias y prácticas en materia de no discriminación y en un espacio de oportunidades para que las ciudades puedan cooperar entre ellas en la elaboración de políticas públicas sobre derechos humanos así como el de generar un frente común entre organismos, estados nacionales y otras entidades internacionales. La red trabaja impulsando diferentes acciones como a capacitación, sensibilización, desarrollando acciones a nivel de cooperación internacional, originando investigaciones, intercambiando buenas prácticas y desarrollando sobre todo una buena estrategia de comunicación y visibilidad con un enfoque informativo y de sensibilización. La red ha participado de proyectos, de múltiples proyectos, con el apoyo de diferentes organismos y programas, todos ellos basados en la difusión y la lucha contra la discriminación, el racismo y la xenofobia. La capacitación que hace a través de talleres, jornadas y cursos de formación y sensibilización tiene un enfoque fundamentalmente hacia la difusión del mensaje de la coalición, que es por ciudades más inclusivas. Desde nuestra red, por ser una red de gobiernos locales, lo que buscamos también es influir en las agendas internacionales, participando de foros globales como el Foro Global contra el Racismo y la Discriminación, o la Consulta Regional de Expertos sobre Racismo y Discriminación para América Latina y el Caribe, como organizada por UNESCO, y siempre desde allí se está haciendo recomendaciones para el cambio de estrategias, para el cambio de normativas, para el fortalecimiento de la sociedad civil, y para hacer un abordaje de las problemáticas en forma más integral y con una mirada internacional. Montevideo, como ciudad líder de la coalición, está comprometida con estas políticas y está desarrollando actualmente un plan de acción interseccional de equidad étnico-racial, movilidad humana, diversidad sexual y de género en políticas públicas de la ciudad. También tiene una estrategia de territorialización de la dimensión étnico-racial que va desde 2020 a 2025. Y también se ha dado en hacer capacitación laboral para personas refugiadas y solicitantes de asilo de todas las nacionalidades como forma de insertarse en el mercado laboral en las mejores condiciones de igualdad como lo son los ciudadanos. Bueno, yo me quedo por aquí. No sé si después podemos seguir avanzando con respecto a las propuestas y a los objetivos que nos plantearon desde la organización. Muchas gracias.
To both of you, Christina and Luhan, mahalo nui. Mahalo nui for your sharing and kickstarting us with this important dialogue. Ladies and gentlemen, you are so extremely tolerant, and I know this. I make a few assumptions. I assume that you know how to use the interpreter's button by actually highlighting the language that you need to translate it to. And sometimes you cannot actually turn off the original audio. I know that you know this. I'm also going to assume that you know that if you have a question, please use the chat box and insert your question there so that we may pick it up. The third assumption that I've made is that you know that when we do have the floor open to you, that you will know to use the raise hand button, and so that we could bring you into this particular dialogue. Those are the few assumptions that I make, but thank you so much. In terms of being civil society activists, we must advocate for the widespread political commitments to racial justice, institutional change, cohesive legislation, and I know that you know that. And that we must focus more on progressive and holistic, as has been noted by Luhan, structural changes towards race and ethnicity, and certainly migration, so that we can begin to change repressive and discriminatory policies and uplift our inclusive social protections. That's what we're about. And that's what we have all fought for ever so diligently, from the sidelines, from the front lines, from the back lines, from every line and position that we could possibly take. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for allowing me to bring into this particular dialogue a young leader from Papua New Guinea. Ronnie is extremely well known in our Pacific circles. He is an amazingly charismatic young brother who is extremely loud and proud about his advocacy for our people in West Papua. You may indeed be quite familiar with the issues, and if you are, well done, we need you on board. And if you're not quite well known, if you're not quite well familiar with the details, then perhaps Ronnie can take us through a few. Ronnie, welcome once, welcome twice. Thrice I welcome you. Wah, wah, wah. And the floor is yours.
Wah, 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 wah. Many thank you. Before I begin, I'd like to pay respect to the Nanawal and Ngambri people, who are the custodians of this land that I'm speaking from, here in Canberra, Australia. And I would like to extend by saying that their sovereignty never ceded. Like many indigenous people around the world, the indigenous people of Papua or West Papua have survived and thrived under the brutal colonial occupation of Indonesia. But before I go any further, I'd like to extend my acknowledgement to the organizers, William, Colin, and the team. Also, the wonderful opening statement by the keynote speaker, Christina and Luhan as well, and to the moderator, our Pacific Elder, Lida, and Matua. And it's great to share this virtual space with everyone. Reflecting on the contemporary issues on race and ethnicity in migration, the flip side is entwined with slave trade and colonialism, which I argue breeds racism. And racism itself is subject to several interpretations involving, for example, skin discrimination, biological derogation, cultural supremacy, and ideological considerations of racial identity. Ethnic and racial discrimination continue to be highly prevalent around the world. And as from the recommendations, and yeah, totally agree, like with many people holding stereotypes and believing that ethnic minorities and people of color are dangerous, lazy, less intelligent, and so forth. And in settler colonies such as Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and the US, structural racism is a serious problem on the health, social, economic, and cultural experiences of indigenous peoples, and was consolidated at the inception of their respective constitutions and continues in systems today. This is no different to the case of West Papua, located in the southwest of the Pacific, bordering the arbitrary line drawn by the administrating powers, the Netherlands, Germans, and British in the 20th century, which woven into Indonesia's brutal constitutional structures that denies indigenous people of West Papua their fundamental right to self-determination, a founding principle in the inception of the United Nations. And racism towards West Papuan dates from the annexation by Indonesia in 1962, followed by the international acquisition in 1969, when just 1,026 indigenous West Papuans out of a population of 800,000 were handpicked and coerced into legitimizing Indonesian control through the so-called act of free choice. For indigenous people, it was act of no choice. Leaked US cables show diplomats justifying this colossal betrayal with the racist belief that Stone Age Papuans were incapable of exercising their democratic right. The death of George Floyd triggered an important global discussion about structural racism, including in West Papua. In June 2020, terrible injustice played out in Indonesia's legal system. 56 Black political prisoners put on trial for treason over 2019 anti-racism protest in West Papua. For 7 of those activists, Indonesian prosecutors had sought jail terms ranging from 5 to 17 years. The 7 were found guilty, but none was sentenced to more than a year, meaning that with already served time they spent in the prison. And without a doubt, this unexpected result happened due to a sudden outpouring public support in the form of Papuan Lives Matter marches in 8 cities and solidarity statements from student associations across Indonesia. Today, with the issue of self-determination, right to self-determination, whereby within the Pacific, it is still, or it remains an unfinished business. And with West Papua, the people of Bougainville, Kanaki, it's a French, Kanaki is a French territory, French Polynesia, Guam, where the militarization in parts of this region, this is where we see how the militarization, colonization comes in the form of structural injustice to the indigenous people. And without further ado, I'll leave it there and would love to continue this conversation further. But thank you for the opportunity to share this this opportunity with you guys. Thank you.
Thank you, Tumas. Ronnie, I'll just explain to a few of our peoples who may not be familiar. Wherever Pacific has spoken about West Papua, and this has happened quite frequently in the last 2-3 years, the webinars in particular that we have all appeared on, we have had to be extremely cautious and careful because our own other peoples who don't quite agree with the position of defending West Papua have inundated the webinars and have been extremely unkind in their commentary in the chats. And so we've had to be quite careful and cautious where our advocates have turned up to speak for the West Papua who don't quite have a voice at present. And so, Ronnie, I appreciate, such as William has noted, that you have appeared, because just being here is an important inclusive practice that we must continue, and we must protect other people who are needing extra support. So I must make that note. I see from the commentary on the side of me in the chat that there are those of you who have defended the rights of a multilingual chat box. Thank you very much for that. It's good that you're all monitoring one another and that you are all helping to shape this better dialogical platform that we all want and need. The one question that I can't quite answer for you concerns the actual course. So if you could direct that to the hosts, that would be extremely good. However, if we could save the space for other comments, I see that nobody has yet raised their hands, either that or I haven't done very well by my navigating the frames. Is there someone who wishes to take up the floor right now in response to any one of our 3 speakers, a point made by the speakers, a notion, an idea, a concept that has been proposed? Is there anyone on the floor who wishes to contribute a thought? I urge and welcome you to do it now so that you don't have to compete right at the tail end when it occurs to you. Thank you. May I give the floor to Saeed Hadzibulik. I will make every attempt to sound your names out because they're so beautifully shaped, the letters, but I may get it wrong, and I know you will correct me in due time. The floor is yours. Where it's possible for your connectivity for you to appear on screen so we can see how good looking you are, you're most welcome to turn on your video. If it's not quite possible, that is okay as well. Over to you, Saeed. So, when I say over to you, Saeed, that means that you have to unmute yourself. That's the other assumption I'm going to make about our technical skills that we have all acquired. Thank you.
Can you hear me now?
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. I am connecting you from Chicago, but I'm originally from Turkey. My questions for the Ronnie, if I'm pronouncing your name, I'm sorry, but I would like to know, how was the response from the government for, for the people you were talking, like, in your community? For the COVID, they were like taking care of them or they were ignoring them?
Ronnie, that question was for you. Do you wish to unmute and respond, please?
Sorry, I didn't view the question as it came up before. So what was the question?
Saeed, do you wish to repeat or shall I repeat for you?
Yes, I can repeat. I'm sorry, I'm trying to unmute myself, but it's giving the technical problem. So I was trying to say that, what was the response from the government for the community you were talking? Like they respond well for the COVID or they ignore this community? So I wonder how was the reactions of the governments?
Over to you, Ronnie.
Okay, sorry, I couldn't hear, but perhaps because of I didn't hear through the interpretation. But from reading through the text there, what was the response from the government to those community? If that's the question, I get it right. But one can help me to make sure that I'm on the right track. In terms of West Papua and how they handle through the policies from the top down, from the government, it is a militaristic approach. And so in terms of any form of expression, any activities that one can think under the sun that any indigenous person could use to express just the thought or just by getting together, the response has been very brutal. Democracy, just the word itself, it doesn't exist in the community around in West Papua. Perhaps it's through the election, parliamentary election process, whereby people are gone through this process, but to freely exercise that, the response from the government has been through a excessive use of force, military force. And so this has been since over the period of since the 60s up until now. And so it silenced the voice of the indigenous people, which was highlighted earlier as well from our moderator. And when reflecting back on the 2019 anti-racism protest that took place in West Papua, it was also around the time with for Papuans, if only journalists could cover West Papua's struggle as thoroughly as they do uprisings in the US or Hong Kong, but they cannot. And Reporters Without Borders ranks Indonesia 119 in the press freedom, and largely due to the drastic restrictions on media access to West Papua. So the voice of the community is suppressed and silenced, and no one even hear about what is really going on. And even today, as I'm speaking, the civil resistance leader who mobilized, and he is this international spokesperson for West Papua National Committee. It's one of the largest civil resistance organization on the ground. They've now detained him, and he is in isolation for over 3 months now, and no legal support. But because of immense pressure from the people on the ground, the civil resistance, many were injured, brutally forced to not take any peaceful action. Their actions for 2 solid weeks has led to this civil leader to access medical care. And that's just an example. And his legal case now, he's being charged for treason. And the crime is simply organizing peaceful demonstrations against racism that took place in 2019 in Surabaya, where Papuan students were called monkeys by the security forces, who came in and used tear gas and arrested many of the students. And it turned into a civil resistance, where spontaneous actions throughout Indonesia for 2 weeks, and West Papua particularly. So the experience has been very excessive use of force to the local community in Papua by the institutions, such the military, which is another arm's length of the government. Thank you.
Thank you, Ronnie. And if I could also support the response, you will be aware that very little information has come out simply because of the controls in place. Therefore, we are not certain of the numbers of West Papua that have been infected. And you will also be aware that in Indonesia itself, the rates were extremely high. So we will just keep an eye on the situation, as is every other advocate and activist. Thank you for the question. May I ask this question that has come in from one of our people present, and may I give it over to you, please, Christina? Paul says, I want to know Black Lives Matter movement in the US and what is its impacts worldwide for migrants in terms of discrimination and ethical racism. Excuse me. Thank you, Christina.
Yes. So to provide a little context, the Black Lives Matter movement was a civil uprising that took place originally in the US, but spread globally in response to the use of state violence against unarmed Black people. that is the shortest way that I can explain it. Really, it was a boiling point after a succession of unarmed Black men, particularly, and some women, I'm trying to like. It's been an 8-year struggle to address structural and interpersonal violence that has really been upheld by the legal system, particularly as it relates to police officers and vigilantes. I know vigilantes may be a harder word to translate, but individuals who act to quote unquote enforce the law and really surveil and control the free movement of Black bodies in public space. So whether it's people walking down the street, people in a store, people living their day-to-day lives, there is a higher instance of there being a negative and violent interaction leading to death if that person is Black. And that is as a result of cultural practices as well as laws that disproportionately impact Black Americans. And so the Black Lives Matter movement has become a framework that many other marginalized communities, but particularly Black and Brown communities globally, have been able to adopt to see the similarities in terms of institutional and structural violence against ethnic minorities. And so that's where that intersection is in terms of ethnic and racial minorities in a migration context. So what you find is that not only are there higher instances of state violence against ethnic minorities, there's an added layer of if they come from migrant communities. So the further you are, the further you are away from whiteness, there is a higher chance of you being a victim of state violence. And this common thread has really spurred a conversation, not only in the US, but in other communities. And the role of advocates and activists has really been to not only interrogate state violence, but interrogate our own movements and how we perpetuate the marginalization of Black communities. And so in particular, in the global conversation on migration, often there is invisibilizing of Black migrants, whether that is folks coming out of Latin America, whether that's folks that are in South Asia. And so we know that there is a lot of work to be done in addressing anti-Blackness specifically, and which is really why I was particularly excited about this conversation, because often we tend to create a container for the most of us while not paying attention to those that are at the margins, leading to policies and practices that disproportionately harm marginalized communities, particularly Black communities. I will stop there. Well, actually, I will provide a little bit more context because I believe I did not discuss more about my role. So I lead an office for immigrant integration out of Miami-Dade County, Florida. So Florida being in the southern US. And the state of Florida is home to the largest population of Black immigrants in the United States. And so we confront the issues of being a minority and majority community in Miami-Dade County that still faces issues of anti-Blackness and structural racism. And the unique challenge is that there are other ethnic minorities that are perpetuating and upholding white supremacy. And that is because we do not discuss how anti-Blackness is pervasive globally. And that, again, ties to the Black Lives Matter movement in saying that we need to address the dehumanization of Black bodies globally in order for us to have an equitable, safe, and welcoming society wherever we are.
Mahalo, Christina. Excuse-moi, Luhan. Patricia Gaines has a question for you. Thank you for being patient, Patricia. Over to you. Patricia.
Hi everybody. Could you hear me? Genial, thank you. Thank you for this amazing time to get together. I will make a question to Eric. I don't know your name. Okay. I would like to know, voy a hablar en español, porque somos las dos del mismo lugar. ¿Qué políticas públicas concretas dirigidas a migrantes puede nombrar realizadas desde el gobierno de la ciudad, desde el gobierno de Montevideo? ¿Y cuáles han sido las acciones específicas dirigidas a migrantes en esta crisis actual de COVID que ha sido tan dura, especialmente para las economías de nuestros países. Muchas gracias.
Gracias, Patricia. Bueno, una de las acciones que la ciudad de Montevideo viene llevando adelante es un plan de acción interseccional de equidad étnico-racial, movilidad humana, diversidad sexual y de género en políticas públicas, que ha sido una plataforma para construir una política pública de generar buenas prácticas y compartirla también en las demás ciudades de la red de la coalición LAC. Este plan se viene implementando desde el año 2019, o sea, ejecutando, se viene implementando desde años anteriores, desarrollando, pero se empezó a ejecutar en el año 2019. Otra de las políticas públicas que viene llevando adelante la Intendencia de Montevideo es la estrategia de territorialización de la dimensión étnico-racial, que va a ser desde el periodo 2020-2025 y se llama Afrodescendencia Resiliente por una mejor calidad de vida, donde Montevideo allí hace una renovación de su compromiso en la erradicación del racismo y la discriminación racial, y comparte la experiencia también a nivel internacional. Otra de las acciones que está llevando adelante más recientemente es la capacitación laboral para personas refugiadas y solicitantes de asilo o protección internacional de todas las nacionalidades, y esto ya se está haciendo en el plan, en el marco del plan ABC, que es el programa de protección y de cuidados y también de apoyo por la pandemia de COVID-19, y allí se brinda capacitación laboral en ventas, en atención al cliente, en marketing, en logística, dirigida a personas refugiadas y solicitantes de asilo que residen en Montevideo y que tienen la voluntad de insertarse laboralmente tanto en el área comercial y atención en algunas de las dependencias, ya sea de la Intendencia o de otros lugares. Y bueno, no sé si después conoces sobre el plan de apoyo en materia habitacional, que eso fue como, diríamos, la primera acción que hizo Montevideo en el marco de la pandemia. Montevideo, el problema que tiene es que la mayoría de los migrantes que llegan se habían alojado en zonas de pensiones, en lugares de alquiler, y bueno, al perder su fuente laboral, no tenían con qué pagarse, no pagar una solución habitacional, y por eso Montevideo dio en primera instancia un apoyo en ese sentido. No sé si Patricia quedó un poco respondida a tu pregunta.
Ok, gracias. Sí, muchas gracias. ¿Cómo es tu nombre? Perdón, porque para no decirte por todo. Luján.
Luján.
Muchas gracias, Luján. Me imagino, y ¿tienes una idea de a cuánta gente está llegando en términos reales, por ejemplo, esta acción en materia habitacional? Una idea.
Bueno, nosotros tenemos un poco dividido lo que es el tema del apoyo habitacional, tanto para lo que son ciudadanos uruguayos como son para el tema de migrantes. Es en el entorno más o menos de 200 familias.
Okay. ¿Y piensan continuar con ese plan? Porque en términos reales sí, el problema de la vivienda en Montevideo para las personas migrantes es gravísimo.
Sí, se ha presentado un proyecto al Mayor Migration Council, al fondo del fondo del Consejo de Alcaldes, con el fin de poder subvencionar, sobre todo con perspectiva de género, poder subvencionar lo que es dar una solución habitacional a madres y a mujeres, sobre todo, que tengan a cargo a niños y a personas minusválidas. Poder darle solución habitacional, solución en salud, alimenticia y de educación. Es un proyecto
Muchas
que
gracias.
está a la vista. De nada.
Gracias.
As they say in Tahiti, Maruru Nui, thank you very much. And especially your patience, Muhammad Umar Hamdi. The floor is yours for your question, please. Thank you. Over.
Hi, my question is recently during COVID-19 situation, young returning migrants in my community faced big challenge to reintegrate themselves due to discriminatory norms, myths, and misconception about returning migrants. Health condition cause stigmatization and xenophobia against young population of migrants workers and their families. So how to address it?
That was quite an important question. And may I ask, do you wish to, oh, there you are, Christina. May I give it to you to respond to the kind gentleman who's been patient for a response? Thank you.
Definitely. Mohammed, this is a very common challenge that we see. As I had mentioned when I had first started this conversation, that the COVID-19 pandemic has really brought out the worst elements of our cultures in terms of trying to further marginalize and isolate migrant communities as the carriers or the perpetuators of the COVID-19 virus. And so one of the things that we have done is, as a part of our awareness and public health campaigns, we have made sure that one of the key talking points that we have is that migrant communities are not the source or are not responsible for the spread of COVID, and that it is all about our individual actions as members of the community and our own responsibility to maintain the collective health of our communities. And so that by isolating really by isolating certain communities, we're doing us all a disservice because we're not able to correctly treat and engage with public health policies that would actually be effective for us to be able to control the spread. So it's an opportunity to engage your local officials. I don't know if your like municipality is doing anything in regards to COVID. I know that it has been a very difficult situation to manage, but it's an opportunity to not only address this inherent xenophobia, but a chance to dig deeper and see what are some other practices that are enabling the exclusion of these communities. And so it takes a little extra effort to demonstrate or to model welcoming. This is definitely a theme that we really adopt in Miami-Dade County, to say that we are welcoming to all, and actually demonstrating what that looks like. And that means to engage everyone and to actually address what is happening versus letting it go forth. I don't know if that's helpful.
Is Pickham in the room? Michelle, are you on the screen somewhere? No, that's okay. We could come back. Laura, you have been so patient. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Good night, everyone. I would like to address my question to Luján, so I'm going to switch to Spanish. Luján, mi nombre es Laura, soy colombiana y me gustaría preguntarte dos cosas en particular. La primera es, tú nos has hablado de estos programas de ciudades inclusivas que están manejando en Montevideo y me gustaría saber si estas iniciativas son iniciativas o son políticas públicas que vienen dirigidas desde el Estado para garantizar los derechos de los migrantes. Y adicionalmente me gustaría saber si tienen alguna política pública específica de protección para los venezolanos en movimiento dentro de la región. Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias, Laura. Con respecto a tu primera pregunta, sí te puedo decir, son políticas públicas que se están desarrollando desde el gobierno local, desde la Intendencia de Montevideo, o sea, no vamos a llamarles desde el Estado Nacional, sino desde el gobierno local. La Intendencia de Montevideo cuenta con un área específica que se llama Secretaría de Equidad Étnico-Racial y Poblaciones Migrantes, que atiende específicamente la temática de racial y de poblaciones que están en el contexto de movilidad humana. Entonces Montevideo desde hace muchos años viene desarrollando una política pública a lo largo de los diferentes gobiernos con respecto a esta temática, lo que ha llevado a que sea una política que ha sido sostenible, sostenida en el tiempo. Por otra parte, con respecto al tema de Venezuela, se están haciendo algunas proyecciones, pero bueno, no los voy a difundir porque todavía se está en temas de trabajando a la interna de la Intendencia de Montevideo, específicamente con la población venezolana. En principio lo que se está trabajando es con todos los tipos de población, porque Montevideo, como ustedes quizás no lo sepan, pero sí la ha recibido tanto población venezolana como cubana y dominicana. Han sido las tres corrientes migratorias más fuertes en los últimos años. Y con respecto a esas tres poblaciones sí se han desarrollado acciones, pero en conjunto. Con respecto a la población venezolana, únicamente se está trabajando en un modelo en especial, pero todavía no se ha puesto en funcionamiento. No sé si Patricia ha quedado, perdón, Laura ha quedado respondida a la pregunta.
Laura, were you okay with the response? I know that you're quite interested because Uruguay itself is, of course, one of our, first of Latin
Yes,
American
absolutely.
Voilà.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Lujan. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you. And Iol Ngane Monono, you have been so utterly patient. May we give you the floor right now as soon as you unmute yourself. Thank you. Over.
Thank you very much. My question will go to Christian Francois. I think I'm very interested with the conversation that you brought, especially looking at the xenophobic attacks. When you look at migration and when people start feeling the sense of that, oh, we can't have maybe the jobs because migrants have come in, they've taken it. I want to maybe take maybe the conversation further. Looking at the current trend. For example, I'm coming from Cameroon. I'm in Cameroon. We see more and more the instrumentalization of politicians using ethnic background and race in order to see how they can win votes. We see that ethnicity has been a very big problem in terms of election, in terms of politics in many African countries, in Kenya and the rest. And we look now even in the world, the rise of nationalist parties in Europe, in America. How can we address the issue of migration, ethnicity, and politics? Thank you very much.
Thank you for your question and for pushing the conversation a little bit further. I think anyone who has been paying attention to U.S. politics over the last 4 years has also seen that same issue of scapegoating, yet engaging migrant communities to use them as both a swing vote as well as a fear tactic to push people to vote in one party or the other. And so this is not new. I would like to say that we have to be honest that migration policy is deeply rooted in colonialism, imperialism, and white supremacy globally, right? And so when we see it is a political tool by very nature. We see that in U.S. immigration policy, that to say that one group is deserving while another is not is often tied to our foreign policy as well as internal domestic politics based on demographic breakdown. So, for example, we have a large Cuban population, and we have a large Haitian population in the state of Florida. The state of Florida is a very important state in our electoral politics. It often decides our presidential elections. And so when we look at the immigration policies on what folks arriving from Cuba are able to have access to versus folks from Haiti are able to have access to, you see that it is often a bargaining chip. And we've seen that in recent months with the uprisings in Cuba, as well as with the political instability and earthquake in Haiti. And so we have to remember that policy is not divorced from politics, unfortunately. It is elected officials that are making the decisions regarding policy. And so we do ourselves a disservice as advocates and activists to separate the two. And it is really on citizens and folks who do have political power to mobilize and engage elected officials on their policy platform and their positions, and actually asking them, what are your intentions for the next migrant crisis, or with this particular ethnic group who is particularly marginalized and lacks resources and is being ignored by the state. Or there's a plethora of things that you can actually be asking your elected officials, even at the hyper local level, as the both of us who are speaking are dealing with municipalities, right? So it's not always a executive decision that is happening nationally. It is also a decision making that elected officials at the hyper local level are making. And so I would say that it requires an assessment of how particular ethnic groups and racial groups are being treated by the state, and then setting advocacy and policy goals to engage elected officials at all levels in order to be able to hold them accountable. Because ultimately, we in civil society can fill the gaps, but we cannot solve the larger issue because it is a policy issue that is being driven by politics. I hope that's helpful.
Mahalo, Christina. To those of you who are taking the GCM certificate and academic study in this field, hold on tight and treat this as one of the most important dialogues that you are indeed going to hear. And in particular, the questions that are coming from our peoples, our recipient peoples on the screen. By recipient, I mean that you have been accepted into this room to have this dialogue with all of us. May I give this moment to Gaurav Dahal. Thank you for your patience. The floor is yours. Not a worry. We can come back to you as soon as you find your unmute button. May we give this moment over to you, Abdullah Isaac Omar. Your question, please.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your giving time. So my name is Abdullah Isaac Omar. I'm speaking from Somalia. So if we tackle and Relief and Development Organization, so there is a lot of challenges according to migration. So in the reason that this immigration is is a conflict, a lot of conflict. So politician issues, and also there is a tourism. For example, in Somalia, there is a lot of thousands of displacement families, and including for forcefully tourism, weather shabab. There is a lot of problems that faces the Somali people, and also women like that. The women, they are fleeing from the villages. So that if I advantage for this issue or for this debate, so I'm really, really very appreciate for continuing for these issues.
Thank you for your vote.
And also, and I will give you, and I will recommend you, and I will give you the report that shows the challenges that facing or the migration causes, the challenges, and also the Somali now, they are going for election process. So also we are forcing for the authorities for give women their quotas, and 30% of 30 quotas to elect for the women and to get the power of the position now.
Thank you, Abdullah.
So, thank you so much for giving time, and I'm very happy for your kindly listen, and I will wish.
And I'm very happy that those of you who are new to the field of global compact migration are extremely brave to ask your questions. This is what it's about. This is a very safe space for you to actually have your say, have your contribution, and actually say what is on your mind. So thank you, Abdullah. May we now go?
Thank you so much.
Sorry.
Thank you so much for giving this time. So I hope we will be another time. Thank you.
Thank you, Abdullah. And over to Ngozi Uzuma. The moment has come for you. And if you wouldn't mind unmuting and communicating with us, that would be superb. Thank you.
Hello, good day, good morning, good evening. I'm Ngozi Uzoma. I'm from University of Nigeria, Nsukka, and I'm one of the candidates for GCM program, online program. So mine is especially the participants from the Western world, from Europe and North America, probably the Black lady. How can we reconcile the fact that the push factors of this migration originated from people from the Western world? They dumped their arms and ammunition in third world countries, especially like what we have in Cameroon. The arms and ammunition used in prosecuting the wars, they come from Europe or from North America, most of them. In Somalia, the same thing. And when they create this problem, people flee. And when they migrate to Northern America or Europe, they are asked to leave. So how can we reconcile this? How can we affect the policy? And then the connection with the GCM. Thank you.
Thank you. Who hasn't had a turn? Ronnie, do you have any response to our good recipient and awardee?
Sorry. I probably answered the first part of it, where to reconcile, like why these places around where Africa, Caribbean, Pacific, we have seen in terms of we're coming out from most of the states coming out from post-colonial states, yeah, and there are still non-self-governing territories, and we're seeing the how the neoliberal ideas creating instability in order for strategic economic interest of high developed powers, where they could use those opportunities to go into places where wealth is there. And this is we're seeing when we talk about racism, where the even here, like where I'm here, here in Australia, in terms of the voice of the indigenous people, because of the economic interest by the state and the adoption of the constitution is from the lens of a white fella, and it's not from the indigenous lens or perspective. And so when the military and strategic interest comes at play, then this is where we see issues where stability, where this trying to address the root causes of the problem, we cannot really go above that. And I'm speaking from the perspective of indigenous people, where we see policies, the unjust policies, is everywhere, and it's embedded within the system, and it's also embedded within the construct of the society that we're living. And so when we're looking at that in that perspective, the issues that we're starting to unpack in this discussion here, they comes down to the humanity of we get equal rights as human rights, any issues, racism, climate issues. It comes down to we want a fair and equal opportunity, equal rights for other fellow human beings. And it's about their humanity. And so that is one point where when we started seeing the imperial forces, capital forces, and colonial mindset, which already embedded in the system, the decolonization, deconstruction of this takes the solidarity, takes the transformative change within, like with us, to really address this. But yeah, I can only speak from that, but I guess other speakers could add on more around the second point of that question.
Thank you, Ronnie. You did so remind me that just in the year 2020, there were indeed 331 environmental activists that were murdered. I just thought that should be inserted in there, given that we are also about protection of the environments in the Indigenous component and will. Joan Gloria, you have been so patient. The moment is yours as soon as you have unmuted. Thank you. Over.
Thank you so very much. Hello, am I audible? Okay. Thank you so very much, the organizers of this training. I appreciate so much including us and accepting us to join you people. I am Joan Gloria from Kenya, and this is my first time attending this the Global Compact for Migration, and I'm glad that I'm learning a lot. Thanks again. Mine is not really a question, but just a comment that is in line of our topic today, that is racism and ethnicity and how it affects migrant workers. I want to say that before we talk about here in Kenya, before we talk about those migrants who are going out there overseas to look for employment, we also have migrants who have come from there, from the Western world, coming to do the investment here in Kenya. And we find that since we are blacks, it is difficult to be employed in the like their organizations that they have set up in our country. Therefore, the first class or the top cream jobs that are available in those organizations are meant only for the whites, for the people who have put up the organization, and the small jobs like cleaning and these other stuff are the ones that are slotted for our citizens now. And then you can find that we are also not treated very well by those persons who have employed us in their organizations. So that one is brought about the reason, the color that we are. And I love the fact that Madam Christine mentioned that Black Lives Matters, and I wish we could have this kind of campaign in our country so that we can bring to the limelight and show them that we are also worthy. We are also people. We matter. Our lives matter as employees of those people who are migrants working, who have put businesses in our country. Secondly, we recently have had a lot of distress calls from our people who have gone outside to look for employment overseas on how they are being treated. They are not well. They are not treated well. They don't earn as it is required by the minimum wage in that country probably. And we have factors that pushes us to want to look for employment outside. For instance, the issues of ethnicity in our country is so much, so pronouncing in our country, such that if you are not, like, if you're not in contact person, if you don't know somebody who is in, let's say, in management, and you need a job, it is difficult for you to get if that person is not from your ethnic group. Therefore, it is a very big challenge, even in our very own country. We experience that a lot, and you can't even mention what others go through when they are out there. Thank you so very much for including us in this discussion. We appreciate and we learn a lot. God bless you.
And blessings to you, Joan. Thank you very much. What I'm now going to do, ladies and gentlemen, and I ask your forbearance to let me do this, is that I'm going to ask you to make your questions brief, and you have 1.5 to 2 minutes maximum. We will have all the questions, and then I will hand it over to our keynoters to have a brief response. And if I may ask Mr. Bingham on call and be ready, you may have a concluding thought, sir. So if you wouldn't mind putting your hand down, I have you noted at the conclusion along with Mr. Goy. Thank you very much. I now hand it over to you, Temidayo. Thank you for being patient.
Everyone, I'm Temidayo Adewale from Nigeria, Lagos State to be precise. I'm a community development officer, and I work very close to the grassroots. I'm happy that I'm in the Global Compact Migration Process, and I believe the reason why I'm here is to be able to expand my knowledge on this global migration and how it impacts the society.
Temidayo, if I may please interrupt. Temidayo, I'm sorry, but our connectivity is extremely challenging. Yes. If you are able to type in your comment question, may I beg you to do that, because you keep cutting out, so it's coming across very unclear. Thank you for being so patient. I will now pass it on over to Eugene Tete Kwasi Ariye. It is over to you. Okay, we can come back to you. Over to you, please, Juliet Rogers. This floor is yours for the next minute and a half.
Thank you very much for such an opportunity. Firstly, I want to extend my appreciation for helping me to be part of this program, this training. My question is going directly to Christina. From her presentation, I was able to know and understand that there is a correlation between politics and policy. She also made mention of the fact that the policies that we have, the migration policies, have their background on colonialism and imperialism. Now, my question is this: what has the global policy on migration done about such? What has the United Nations done about that? Because taking into account we are now living in the 21st century.
Thank you for the question, Juliet, and she has taken note of it so that she may have a response at the tail end. May I now give it over to you, Patty Knudsen. The floor is yours for the next minute.
Madam Moderator, I'm very happy to be joining you on this afternoon, and thank you for having me. Thank you everyone, and also particularly to the students that are joining us for their engagement. Mine is a simple one, a bit of a short clarification, so I'll go a bit speedy, and I apologize to the interpreters for this, but I thought, we're meeting at an opportune time because, the Global Compact for Migration is set basically on the premise of being forward-looking, and therefore the discussions that we're having here really are falling in between and over the cracks, and making the necessary links, particularly to topics around migration and development. I think that was a question that was asked, and particularly looking at how we can decolonize public policy. And of course, we know that migration is a very important part of public policy. And so, these discussions sit very well and also linked to Global Compact for Migration, Objective number 17, and also thinking about, things like, legal pathways and flexibility and access. And I'm glad Christina raised this, in talking about, skilled workers that we need, skilled workers we don't need. It's always about what do we need, and not really thinking about what are the needs of the markets, what are the needs of the migrants coming across. And to our speakers, and particularly also to Christina, if you could also nose in on this, I wondered, if we're forward looking in this Global Compact for Migration, what can we say about the role of research in bringing out evidence and the role of research that could come from civil society and other actors within the non-state actor body, so that we provide enough evidence to change, to influence policy, to influence politics, like the previous speaker has said, so that these are really based on evidence. And very, very, very happy to be part of this. My name's Paddy Sianga Knudsen, and I'm from the GRFDT, which is a co-organizer of this event. Thank you very much.
And thank you for the pertinent questions about decolonization. I can see a new book coming up, Over the Cracks, or between the, in between and over the cracks, as you noted. Thank you for your question. May I please move over to Ahmed Murtala. The moment is yours as soon as you've unmuted. Thank you.
Hello. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for having me. I want to put my question to Christine Francois. From your community development work in addressing ethnicity, I want you to help me resolve this confusion I'm seeing. Here in Nigeria, I'm calling from Nigeria, Plateau State, Jos, Plateau to be precise, is a conflict-driven community in Nigeria. Right now, about 3 weeks ago, there was an ethnic crisis in the city, and I come to see migrants being victims of circumstance, and this is somehow related to their identity. I see ECOWAS migrants from Niger who are Muslims and who are neighboring some communities that are Muslims. They are Nigerians, actually, the Hausa Nigerians. They share religion with Nigerians. And during this crisis, they suffer a lot of casualty because they are bordering a neighboring indigenous group that is having ethnic crisis with the Hausas in Jos. I also see Chadians when they come to Nigeria, many of them reside around Dadabi, which is a Christian-dominated community. They are not Nigerians, and their ethnicity is not really relevant here. Their identity, anyway, is in a way linked together. Is their religion that is really a point of contention here. I see many Chadians being killed by Muslims in this city for being Christians, and their nationality or migration status is irrelevant. So how do you help me, express this further and see how do we address this from community development perspective? Thank you.
Thank you for that, Ahmed. I really appreciate your asking the question. May I move over to Halifang Gloria Jase? It is your turn as soon as you've unmuted.
Yes. Thank you very much. Let me put my video on so that you can see me. Yes, my name is Gloria. I'm from Lesotho originally, but I'm currently based in Somalia, working with the African Union Mission in Somalia as a protection officer, basically working on issues of conflict-related sexual violence, SGBV, and children and armed conflict. In my area of work, we work closely with the internally displaced persons and the returnees. Now, the topic that we are having today is really very interesting and very critical to this discussion. And to me, it is beyond race and ethnicity. There are so many things that we need to correct in our different societies in order to achieve our goal in protecting the migrant workers, either through forced migration or voluntary migration. I will give you an example of the events that happened in the past in the Republic of South Africa, in the region where I am coming from, where there were incidences of xenophobia, and a lot of people around African countries were killed. They were banned to our front. We witnessed those cross violations, which was very unfortunate. In our different African societies, we have an issue of clans or tribes. Many countries in Africa have different tribes. Their societies are constructed with tribes. And for example, in Somalia in particular, the challenge that is facing the country, it is not only violent extremism, it is also the issue of clan clashes. So unless we correct these particular social problems, we will have a discussion that do not have a solution. In South Africa, what happened? We did not see migrant workers from Europe being attacked. It was African migrant brothers and sisters who were attacked in the Republic of South Africa. They were even particular when they were doing their attacks that, okay, we cannot attack people from Lesotho, from Swaziland, and from Botswana, because they are more or less look or behave like us culturally. But people from Nigeria, from Zimbabwe, from Zambia, they were attacked mercilessly. So this is something that has to start from our communities back in our countries. And we cannot, as Africans, continue to blame the Europeans on arming the rebels in different African countries with ammunition. That shouldn't be the case. It is not the case. We need to correct the societal structures in our own African countries and different countries, so that this discussion to a certain extent will be successful in the protection of migrant workers. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And thank you for understanding that when I do this, that means your time is nearly up. You've got 1-2 words to fit in. Thank you so much for that. And I'm sure that the keynoters have taken note, Gloria. May we go over to Eugene? Eugene Ari, are we trying you again? We can come back to you as soon as your connectivity improves, if that's okay. Thank you very much. We will now go over to Fiasatan Lijmak Inwa. Tis over to you, sir.
Thank you very much. Excuse me, I want to say this is a very fantastic session. But for me, I'm looking at it from a different perspective. I'm looking at what I would call the gap in collaboration between non-state actors and civil organizations working on migration and integration of returned migrants in Africa. I mean, fantastic. I can hear people talk about, what civil societies are doing in other parts of the world, in the Pacific, in the Americas. You understand? But I found out that there seems to be that gap with civil societies that are interested in working either in pre-migration or return migration. And this is, for me, it leaves us in this part of the world out of the whole loop. So I'm actually interested in that. And the reason why I'm interested is so that we can leverage the opportunities and the network here going forward and know that, okay, people migrate, people are returned. So what happens to them? But if we have non-state actors collaborating with us here, it helps to mitigate this very well. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. It's a critical point, and we haven't forgotten any parts of the world. If you're actually part of this particular program and study, you will get to that extremely poignant part. May I go over to Aliu Sowe? It is over to you as soon as you've unmuted. Thank you. You have 1 minute. We can come back to you. May I go? Okay, I've lost somebody. Aliu, are you able to come on in? Thank you very much. I am so excited that you are excited and that you have been brave enough to ask your questions. May I hand it over in this order? You have 1-2 minutes, please, our keynoters. Everybody, I'm going to ask your forbearance for a few extra minutes. We'll just push it out a little bit, no more than just a few. And so we're going to go in the order that we spoke. Christina, over to you, Luhan, and then over to you, Ronnie, and then our final speakers on behalf of certainly the network will be Mr. Bingham, and on behalf of the amazing organisers, you, Mr. Goy. So that's how we're going to go, and we've only got a few minutes to do this, everybody. Aliu, I see you've come back. Will you make it 1 minute?
Okay. Thank you very much, Speaker. It's a pleasure joining this class. I am Aliu So from the Gambia. Over the years, I've observed a lot of patterns in the global migration. Returnees from European countries coming back to Africa, especially the Gambia, have not been definitely resettled in the manner that they should start from, will help them develop themselves. Practically speaking, I want to ask about how the UIOM, the United Nations International Organization on Migration, doing or to solve some of these problems that returnees are facing back in Africa, especially where this is not properly organized or managed. Thank you.
Thank you for emphasizing the returnees again, such an important agenda. May I ask the hosts, please, if we may, are we able to push this to 1:45, which only allows us a few minutes? May I ask the chief host, is it okay if we push this to 1:45? Thank you very much. I'll take that as a yes. And so I can accept your question of 1 minute, J. Mark. Over to you as soon as you have unmuted.
Good morning, good evening, and good night from the People's Republic of China. I don't know where every one of you getting me. Hello, are you getting me?
Yes.
Hello? I thought.
Yes, we are getting you. We can hear you.
Afternoon, good morning, good night from the People's Republic of China. I'm J-Mark Deminson Tokwe, and I am a Liberian. But I want to stress a few points from China pertaining the issue of racism as it relates to migration. During the issue of the pandemic, we were many migrants in China were thrown out of their hotels. Some of them were thrown out of schools in China, saying that they were the one who brought the coronavirus. So I don't know how is the international community dealing with such issue, because it was live. Many Nigerians were going live with this issue. Many Liberians, Africans in Guangzhou, one of the biggest cities in China, were going live with this issue. Chinese were blaming the blacks on the issue of corona, that it was them who brought corona in their country. So I don't know how is the international community and others partners that are dealing with this issue of migration and dealing with this issue.
Thank you, J. Mark. That's an important reminder about international responses in crisis. Thank you. I will move over to Patricia Miller-Froys. You have 1 minute. Thank you, Patricia.
Thank you. Thank you for everyone for what has been so far is very illuminating for me. I believe we're strapped for time, so I'll try to be very quick. I noticed so far that most of the discussion revolved around marginalized ethnic and migrant communities that have settled in these countries. My questions are more specific to the pandemic and how it has exhausted the health systems all over the world, which also saw the active recruitment of Western countries of healthcare workers from global South countries like the Philippines and India, for instance. On one hand, I think these trends are very much embedded in colonialism, so perhaps Ronnie could address that aspect. But at the same time, I believe Christina could comment, because in the United States, there was an alarmingly disproportionate rate of deaths among Philippine migrant nurses, for instance, and other minorities in the general population. So I would really like to know if Ronnie or Christina or anyone really with the expertise, what can the civil society do in Western countries to address this very disproportionate experience of the pandemic among ethnic minorities and migrants? And is this even something that advocates could address fully? Because as Christina also mentioned, advocates could fill the gaps, but at the end, it's structural change that needs to occur. So how do we do this in the urgent context of the pandemic? That's all for me.
Thank you very much, Patricia. If I could hand that question also over to Mr. Bingham, who has a little bit of an umbrella overview. Ladies and gentlemen, you have been amazing. We've gone through all of the questions that did come up on the screen, barring one whose connectivity was challenging. Otherwise, your questions that appear in the chat will certainly be taken seriously by the hosts, and I will offer that they will indeed come back to you in one form or another. May we hand this moment over to Christina. You have 2-3 minutes, please, ma'am.
So first, I'd like to say that these were amazing questions. I took so many notes, and my mind is already buzzing with all of the intersections, and I think that what comes up for me is to really say that on the one hand, our immigration policy is a neocolonial practice that is extractive, exploitative, violent, and racist. And on the other hand, migration flows are not in one direction, and that I really wish I had more time to dig into this issue of returnees, having been a returnee myself to Haiti from the United States, and realizing that ultimately, we cannot forget that racism is a root cause of migration. That's a common theme that I've heard in the discussions thus far, whether that is folks of African descent leaving the continent or folks moving across borders within the continent, within the global north. And so for me, I think that the role of civil society really is in this evidence and research gathering that was brought up earlier by Patty. And I think that in order for folks to be able to see structural changes, it's going to require intentional and collaborated efforts. It's going to require collaborations across ethnicities and across race. It's going to require unpacking internalized anti-Blackness on a global level. It's going to require addressing xenophobia. And we cannot forget that we are operating in a global pandemic as there are major economic pressures, climate disaster, and threats to democracy. And so if we know that the container with which we're operating in and the legacies with which we're carrying into our decision-making, then I have faith that we can make intentional and powerful policies through collective action. And so while for folks this may seem like disparate issues, what I'm hearing is that all of these issues are intertwined and all of our struggles are intertwined. And that is you cannot separate. I like to say that migration policy is both an international and a domestic policy. It is the intersection of so many of our issues, and it requires civil society and average citizens and decision makers to acknowledge the importance of migration as a human nature, right? We will continue to migrate, and we will continue to receive, and we will continue to have tensions. And how can we improve the ways in which we treat each other? And that's really in centering our humanity, regardless of the things that make us different. And so I would like to say that I appreciated this conversation so much. And I think that I challenge us all who are in the policy or advocacy space to not just think about what are receiving communities, what are the policies that receiving communities can adopt, but also how are we centering the needs of those leaving, of migrants. And I think that if we keep that at the center, that we actually can have humane policy.
As the Fijians would say, Christina, Vinaka Vakalevu. And may I now hand it over to you, Ms. Vila, and your closing and or concluding thoughts, please, ma'am.
Muchas gracias. Como decía Cristina, el racismo es inherente a la migración y requerirá esfuerzos colectivos y un enfoque holístico. Y alcanzar el objetivo de poder lograr una migración segura, ordenada y regular, como dice el Pacto de las Migraciones, es un trabajo constante y necesita de la participación de todas las partes interesadas, de todos los stakeholders, de sociedad civil, de gobiernos locales, de gobiernos nacionales, de organismos internacionales, porque sin esa alianza la tarea será mucho más difícil. Educar, sensibilizar, generar espacios de discusión, laboratorios de aprendizajes, empoderar a los líderes, son todas pequeñas, grandes acciones que todos podemos ir realizando ya desde nuestro lugar, desde la sociedad civil, desde los gobiernos locales, desde donde sea nuestra posición para poder lograr una mejora en lo que es la migración. Nosotros consideramos que las autoridades locales son aliados fundamentales en la mejora para una migración más segura. Los gobiernos locales son quienes están más cerca de la ciudadanía y son la puerta de entrada y salida de respuesta inmediata a las necesidades de la gente. Conocen y trabajan con la gente y con la sociedad civil muy cercana. Pero también los gobiernos locales están teniendo una incidencia cada vez mayor en las agendas globales y al mismo tiempo han incrementado de alguna manera la conciencia sobre la importancia y el poder transformador que tienen las acciones desde lo local. En este contexto, el papel de los gobiernos locales como plataforma para la implementación, seguimiento y monitoreo de las agendas globales y mecanismos continentales en temas de etnia y movilidad humana es permanente y enriquecedor, y es fundamental porque son quienes llevan la voz de la sociedad civil para que haya cambios a nivel de las normativas, para que haya cambios a nivel de las organizaciones internacionales. Bueno, quedo muy agradecida por este espacio y deseando poder haber sido útil con la información brindada y quedamos siempre a las órdenes.
Muchas gracias, and thank you very much for being one of our keynote speakers. And I know that the points that you have made are duly noted, and I know that this will be a continued conversation with you now that you are part of our platform. Thank you. Over to you, Ronnie. Thank you. Thank you, Thomas.
Thank you, Thomas. I won't take a lot from here. The two speakers already summed this up really well. For many of us here on the screen, we are the people we've been waiting for, and transformative change is within our reach, in our courage, in our unity, in our patience, and in our solidarity with one another. Thank you.
Well said. And he was quoting one of our leaders who will speak at the tail end, Mr. Goyes. May I hand it over to you, Chief John Bingham? Bozu.
Thanks very much, Pepe. Nice job all around. Yeah, I'm with the NGO Committee on Migration in New York, but I bring greetings from France, where we have all of these problems, terrible violence, exclusion, and discrimination, a homegrown movement standing up for a Malian young man who was killed by the police here a couple of years before George Floyd in very similar circumstances, a movement that was reinvigorated very much by the global response to George Floyd. So just three observations, if I could, and I say this from an NGO committee, a global coalition that has a subcommittee focused specifically on racism, xenophobia, and inclusion. So three quick observations. First, because I was going to ask these questions earlier, but the speakers from the floor, as well from around the world, as well as the speakers who presented to us, answered these questions again and again and again. So the first, when we talk about racism and ethnicity and migration, we're actually talking about the migration experience in all directions. As Fayestan said so clearly, and others, it's pre-migration, it's in migration, it's post-migration and settlement and so on. It's also not just migrants, it's diaspora, and of course it's return. So it's the full range there. And I think the one pager for this webinar and for this series of conversations with civil society worldwide is very clear to that. But it's so important because it goes to the urgency and the power of working together on this. Again, a point that has been made again and again just a few minutes ago, after many other strong recommendations, strong insistences that we collaborate across the different movements and races and ethnicities. So when the one pager says that, quote, to counter the overpowering discourse, alliances between anti-racist movements are vital in linking struggles of Black people's liberation with those of Asian and Latino migrant communities. It's for diaspora, it's for returnees, it's for Muslim communities here in Europe, it's across the board, it's for white immigrants being persecuted from the Balkans and from Poland in various countries. So the alliances make sense. And last, a great appreciation to Christina and to Lujan, because what we see again and again across all of the migration conversations, the webinars, the focuses on all of the themes, is how front and center the cities and the local communities are and can be even more. And so I think there was a comment by Arjun Dubal in the chat box that lifted the question. You know, we have these problems when national governments come and go. How do we change them? Well, we change them with alliances that look honestly at ourselves and honestly across the full range of migration and diaspora experience, and work at the local level with our leaders. And the Global Compact on Migration talks of all of this. It writes of all of this. For the first time at that kind of level, a negotiated document among governments, very much influenced by civil society, vision and ambition, and by local authorities and mayors, their energy and their day-to-day determination to work with communities in cities, even when the national governments or the international community is afraid to, or worse, or is doing all the wrong things. So what a great webinar. Pefi, great job. Thank you to the organizers. Let's really put these alliances together. We can change this.
Yeah, see, Mr. Bingham, we can always rely on you to not only fill the gaps, but be that wisdom holder, because you are. And so thank you for your part in reminding us that it's only when we work together that we really can try to make the difference, and transformative models is really where we're going with this. This hasn't only just been a talk fest, everybody, and I am really grateful that you have been a part of it, because you're the critical link going forward. So welcome aboard, and thank you for staying hard until this time. All of this wouldn't have been possible if not for our chief leader, who is our concluding speaker. And so I know that you would like to join me when I say mahalo nui to you, William Goyce. The floor is yours. Over.
Thanks, Pefi, and thanks, John, for that. I really like what you said, Christina, with regard to being intentional in our collaboration. And I think, honestly, we have not been as intentional as we could have been, particularly with the local government units, mayors, city councils, and things like that. Listening to you and Lujan speak today has also been a revelation. A revelation in the sense of, I think for us as civil society, our closest ally could be local governments, you know, because both of us claim that we are on the ground dealing with these issues every day, and indeed we are. And that we have not been intentional in our collaboration together is part of our blindsidedness that we must acknowledge. But how do we move forward? And that is the important thing. And I think today's webinar pointed out the urgency of an issue. The urgency of an issue. I was involved with this issue when we had the Durban conference on racism and xenophobia just before September 11th. It was a beautiful world conference that somewhere got lost after September 11th. It was a couple of months before September 11th and it got lost. You know, I put that in the chat as well. We need to have this conversation. We need to have this conversation. We need to have this collaboration more so in today's world now, because the conversation now has shown, and the conversation now that is happening in this webinar in our world at the moment shows also that we have been reluctant to have this conversation. And it's time we picked up this conversation within the migration discourse. I was even reflecting, I was wondering if this kind of conversation was happening vibrant when the negotiation was going on in the GCM, would we have had a different document, more powerful even on this issue? It gives us a lot to take forward. And like John said, its greatest strength is the collaboration. And I think this is what we must continue. I want to thank very specially then Sophie and Fatma from the Mayor's Mechanism, who were very, very instrumental in making this happen. It was a nail-biting finish. And I know you got the invitations late, but that is our team. We are good at nail-biting finishes, kind of thing, right? But that is us, and so it's really good to have you all on board, and definitely, at least we as co-organizers and leaders within this movement are definitely committing ourselves to work with local governments, mayors, city councils, and things like that. Because, like I said, I think this realization is only beginning to dawn on us. Better late than never. Wisdom is like that, but this is a commitment that we are making to work much more closely together with our natural allies. Thank you so much for being with us. Thank you everybody for this fantastic discussion today. It's an urgent issue that must be discussed, and thank you, Pefi, for guiding it so well with all your humor, wisdom, and clarity. Thank you so much. Thank you all.
May I ask your tolerance, everybody? Turn on your cameras. The hosts are just going to take screenshots and hold for 10. Excellent. On behalf of the organizers, may I thank you from the north to the south, east to west, and in between. Thank you for being a part of the dialogue, a part of the thinking, a part of the strategy to come, a part of the studies that is required in the field, the research that is due to come. To you all, may you and your families, your villages, be safe during this time. And thank you for allowing Pacific to have the last word. I know that we don't all pray, but we do all chant. Tangaloa, he wila kuala patata mai fasia hola tawai mata e. Good night, everybody.
Good night. Good night.
Thank you. That was great.
Thank you.
That
Good night,
was
everyone.
wonderful. Thank you. Good
Thank
night.
you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you and bye-bye.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Bye,
thank you.
everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night. God
Thank
bless.
Merci.
Muchísimas
Por
gracias
un lado.
por el espacio.
Thank you. Bye.